welcome back to another Instaviews. I am Saskia, the assistant editor of Voice Mag. Hope you're all having a good afternoon. Today, I am going to be speaking to one of our journalists, Hamish Gray, who was press accredited at COP26 over the past week, and he is going to join us to tell us a bit about COP, some of the events he went to, and his experience at the conference. So if we just give Hamish a minute and then we will get started.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm good, Hamish. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks.
Good. Thought you weren't coming for a second. I was going to have to talk about COP alone.
Oh no, I couldn't find, I didn't get a notification saying voice had gone live, so
okay.
Hopefully I don't have anything muted. That's wouldn't really give a good impression.
Yeah, no worries at all. So, Hamish, you are obviously a journo at Voice, and you spent the last week at COP26 in Glasgow. Tell us a bit about your experience with COP and how you got to be on the press team.
Well, getting on the press team took quite a bit of time. It wasn't as if there was a lot of massive hurdles, but it was just a lot of small things you had to do. So first it was applying, seeing which organisation you're part of, giving evidence that you've written about climate change and UN issues beforehand. And Tom, our editor, had to send in a confirmation saying that, oh, we actually want this person to go to COP. He's not just taking the initiative on his own. I think the strangest part was when I had to FaceTime one of the officials just to show that my face matched my passport. Which was she seemed so just tired, so it must have been doing that for the whole day, just people going in. And experiencing COP itself, I've actually never been in the Scottish Exhibition Centre, so that was interesting in and of itself, but it was such the best description I can think of is a hive of just so many people buzzing around. Everyone seems to be having their own very important thing to be getting on with. People taking photos everywhere. The building itself, the interior design was actually very good, which is not something I should really have made note of, but I guess it. Spoilers for the rest of the interview, but that's one of the few bits I was impressed with. So quite a good experience, just a bit hectic from time to time.
I mean, when the thing that you're most impressed with is the interior design at a climate change conference, that's not the result I'm sure you were hoping for. But tell us what you were expecting from COP, and were any of those expectations met at all?
I'm going to sound like a huge pessimist here. I wasn't expecting a lot in terms. I expected people to sort of use it as like a publicity thing to show, oh, here's what we're doing for climate change, and maybe those promises won't be met. And sorry, could you repeat the question? Is it just what I expected, or what I expected and if it lived up to that?
Yeah, so what were you expecting from COP, and were those expectations met?
Right. Those expectations of a lot of talk and no real solid plans were somewhat met to an extent that there were decent plans on the table, which is always good to hear. And the amount of people and organizations that had gone, that was really promising, because it seemed like everyone really wanted to be involved. And I know some nations didn't send their main leaders, but at least everyone still had a representative. So that was quite positive. But in terms of real trust that this will lead to very solid, radical action that we need, I wasn't entirely convinced, I wouldn't say.
Right. And do you know, off the top of your head, what were some of those plans that were floating around?
Well, one of the events I went to, it was talking about how corporations will handle climate change and what targets they'll have. And that was mostly going on about how, right, we need to establish a firm set of guidelines that companies can involve with. And a lot of it was about, and this doesn't just apply to the business event, to a lot of people were talking about the localization of resources, which I suppose is quite important, because the less you're taking from, you're importing from across the world, the less carbon emissions you're going to be producing. So
Yeah.
that was quite good to hear. But those were mostly the charitable organizations that were talking about that. So, for example, the UN, they were talking about how they would try and push for better climate action and how they have their own carbon footprint they're going to try and offset through, like the localization of resource procurement, and even just leading by example was a big thing. So there were decent plans in place, and I'm sure nations have all talked about the goals for reaching net zero by 2050. That seems to be the very firm, like we all want to reach net zero by 2050. I guess there can still be a bit of uncertainty as to what each nation defines as net zero. So I suppose that's where the points of contention might come in.
I mean, it's not necessarily the charitable organizations that we want to hear from, is it though? Like, were the bigger oil companies or the real, culprits when it comes to carbon emissions, were they saying anything of note? Were they committing?
Well, there was, again, at the business meeting, there was the sort of issue I had with it. All the large companies, they didn't really have representatives there. The only people who were there in that meeting were people who were trying to convince them to deal with climate change. And a lot of, in the side event stalls, there were quite a few companies, and they were all talking about their own goals. And carbon trading seemed to be quite a big one, where they'll plant X number of trees or put funding to X number of climate change things to offset their own emissions. But I mean, obviously I'd need to look into the science behind that to really see how useful that would be. But it seems to me that just something like a token, all right, we've planted this amount of trees, that means our emissions are suddenly gone, whereas that's not really true.
Like planting trees is free reign to just continue to operate as they have been.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see where the pessimism's coming into it, Hamish. I'm really not feeling it.
I'm really trying to like be very hopeful, because one of the events I did go to was about optimism, and the whole thing I was just like, I really wish I could buy what you're saying.
So speaking of the events, tell us about some of the others that you went to and what were they like?
Well, most of the events I went to were the standard, here are a few folk talking about something on a panel, go into the audience, watch, and then oftentimes it'd be a Q&A. I think the ones that really stood out to me, well, one of the ones that stood out to me for kind of the wrong reasons was the intergenerational inquiry between just the whole premise was young people, their voices matter, so let's have a intergenerational dialogue between people from earlier generations and the younger ones. And that was very promising to hear about. But when I showed up to the event, it was great to see it was completely full with young people, and the panel, they were all from the, I don't want to say older generations, but earlier generations, I suppose, is the nicer way of putting it. And there was also a youth panel too. The only issue with that event, well, not the only issue, there were quite a few, was it seemed to me that the only people speaking were the earlier generations. So they had a very long time to talk. Then we had a video where, and this was quite nice to see, Jane Goodall gave a presentation about her work, which again is really good work. And all the people speaking, they had, good points. They were talking about quite important issues. One of them talked a lot about how the fact that COP26, the main language is English, can be quite exclusionary to a lot of people who haven't had the resources to learn English, or that leads to a bit of lack of inclusivity. So really important issues, but they felt like they could have been taught somewhere else, because this was supposed to be giving young people a voice, and they tend to just speak for ages, interact with each other, and then at the end they'd ask one of the youth panelists, so what are your thoughts? And they'd give a quick soundbite, and then you'd be like, okay, great, and move on. And the part that really rankled about that was there was supposed to be this big Q&A at the end. They talked up at the beginning. And by the time we got to the end, because all these people had spoken for so long, there was only time for one question. And that question was just someone saying, hey, the stuff you guys have said, it isn't good. Like the big thing they were talking about was we need to empower the young through education. and inform them and get them to go from protest to suggesting ideas.
Mm-hmm.
But the big issue with that is, and anyone can tell you this, young people are very involved with climate change, and they're already very involved. The issue is really that we're not listened to, and no young people, there aren't any young people who are given a seat on the decision-making table. So the questioner just basically ranted about that for a bit, and it was a very like, oh, you know, we were all fighting for the same thing sort of reply, and then one person at the very end had to kind of force a question through, and she basically said about how the people that the young people had chosen to represent them were given no time to speak. So kind of not a very impressive event,
No,
practically speaking.
I mean, it kind of sounds like the whole event just proved the point that young people aren't listened to about climate change. You've called it, you know, an intergenerational discussion or dialogue, and then all you've done is talk. So, oh, Hamish, okay.
Oh, there was an event that was actually I liked quite a lot. Dulcie actually was able to go to it too. It was in the side event room. There is a space for just dialogue, and it's called Interconnectivity and Dialogue Space. And they do little seminars throughout the day, and you can rock up to it. And it was actually a coincidence that me and Dulcie went to the same one, but that was quite interesting. It was nice to have a bit of sort of sincerity, because a group of us came around and we all talked about our feelings on COP, and everyone had a lot of really interesting input. So I think more of that would be really refreshing, less panels, fewer speeches, and more getting people together to actually talk, even if they disagree.
But in that space, was it mainly just young people talking to other young people? Were there any older ones who were there, you know, listening in?
It was actually a good mix.
Okay.
But like you could almost see just about half the room quite young, other half not so. It was really, and nobody seemed to be pushing their voice above the other, which was quite nice. Everyone seemed to be willing to listen, and willing to talk too, which is good to see, because it was a bit more open and free than other dialogues, quote unquote, that I'd attempted.
Okay. Well, just for clarity as well, Dulcie is another voice journalist who is still currently at COP26 for the rest of the week. So do keep an eye out on our story for more COP coverage from Dulcie. So Hamish, there were a lot of protests at COP26. Did you go to any? Did you talk to any protesters? What was the vibe like?
Well, when I first got into Glasgow, I actually spoke to a few folk from Extinction Rebellion. They'd sort of had a group in George Square, and I was just talking to them about what their hopes are for the event, what they see as the success of COP. And again, I think this might not be too surprising. They weren't very hopeful about COP. I think their perspective is the people who have caused this problem are trying to give us the solutions. So they weren't too cheerful in that regard, but they seemed quite positive in terms of the response to the protest, because I think we all know, like, the protests that happened in the city were huge, and they went on for quite a while. And I know there was like some conflict, but it seemed to me that most of the time they were very positive, and just that we need to take action. So the people from Extinction Rebellion were mostly talking about the way they see success is for awareness to be spread, not in delegates, but in just people on the ground, and to get people to be engaged. So, which is something, you know, I agree with, people being more engaged with it rather than just, you know, an oil company CEO or someone, just people in general caring about this. That sort of seems to be the way forward. Other than that, there were some protests I did pass, and it would be quite interesting seeing a huge line of folk, and it was they were from everywhere. Like, there was so many different flags. There was kids, there was old people. There was a guy dressed as Santa Claus with "Sustain a Claus" written on his back, which was interesting. So I guess like theatrics were on display. But the general vibe seemed to be that COP has been built up by the organisers of COP as this huge event for climate change, and they want to put their thing forward. So the protesters decided, we're going to make this a huge thing for us too, which I think has been quite effective. I know Dulcie actually went and got and walked in the marches. I think talked to a few people, so I think she'd like have probably better insights, or more insights into that.
Did you not fancy walking among the protesters?
Well, it would have been cool, but my thing was it takes like an hour and a half just to get into COP, the actual building. So once I was in, I was like, right, this is me today.
Yeah.
I'm not going to nip out for lunch and then spend like 2 hours getting back in.
No, that's totally understandable.
But no, I think I should have, but it was just that, and then outside of work, I'd be quite busy. So,
so a lot of the press coverage on COP has been quite negative, and I know your feelings on this already are you don't think that COP is going to solve anything. Do you have any kind of glimmer of hope or optimism about it at all?
let me think. Again, the fact that everyone is addressing the issue now is a positive sign. The fact that we've sort of gone from in not too long ago people debating whether we should try and reach net zero to going to saying, all right, we all agree we need to reach it. Now we need to figure out how to do it. So I think the positive thing is we're not going to go back to climate change denial or trying to say that, you know, this isn't really going to be that bad. People kind of know it's going to be bad. I'm supposed to be hopeful. People know it's going to be bad, but now people are definitely going to be doing things about it. The only point of contention is what they do. So again, awareness being spread. I think the fact that Edinburgh and Glasgow or they've got COP stuff everywhere. I think, and this event is being broadcast around the world. Again, everyone's going to be tuned into it, and people who wouldn't normally think about it, even passively, will have absorbed information about it. So yeah, awareness has been raised. So I think this event, the fact that it happened, is perhaps the best point of it, in terms of just what it's going to do for the climate change discourse from now on.
I mean, don't worry too much about being optimistic as long as you're being honest. I mean, that's the main thing. You are a young person who went to COP, you've experienced it. Like, that's why I want to hear from you because, you know, it's giving you that voice. So just before we wrap up then, what kinds of things did you actually cover? Because I know you've got quite a lot of COP stuff on the Voice website at the moment. So what was your main takeaway?
Well, I wrote up quite a few articles just about the events I attended. I'm going to be collaborating with Dulcie on talking about the dialogue space. A big part of it was talking to people there and just taking footage and pictures of all that was happening. There was always something interesting going on, which was quite cool. There was one point that was quite embarrassing where I was sitting down writing on my laptop, and then a group of journalists started appearing in front of me with cameras, and I figured, oh, they're taking photos of the scenery behind me. And then I heard a voice, and there was Bear Grylls was standing right behind me giving a presentation. So oh god, I need to move quickly to get out the shot. So yeah, just because there was always something happening, I was generally like snapping pictures, taking videos. Talked to a few young people on the Young Person's Day. I talked to a guy dressed as Darth Vader outside the building because I wanted to know why he was dressed as Darth Vader, and then he started singing in Spanish. So that was again just another random thing. And I talked to someone from the Eden Project. Oh, sorry, go on.
So why was he dressed as Darth Vader? What was the...
It was to get people to come talk to him. So I guess in my case that worked. And it was largely about this new technology that sounded a little bit science fiction to me, but I'm not an engineer, so I'll have to reserve judgment on that. But
okay. And the Eden Project, you spoke to somebody from?
Yeah, I talked to them. They gave me an interview, but they need to check with their media bosses if they're allowed to actually get it published. So I'll put it up if they can, if he gets a confirmation. But that was interesting, just looking at another event that tries to promote the idea that everything is connected, including all living things, and then trying to get that into communities too. So many people there cared about climate change, and I think that is, you know, the positive side of it.
Yeah. Did you not fancy having a chat with Bear Grylls?
felt a little underqualified for that, to be honest. He had such a huge crowd around him that I just thought I would have to sledgehammer my way through, and I'm not that forceful a journalist, you know.
Not yet. You are UN
Not
accredited, Hamish.
yet.
You had every right to talk to Bear Grylls as anybody else there. So very, very disappointed. No, I'm joking. Next time, don't pass up an opportunity, okay?
Agreed. Okay.
So is there anything more, in your opinion, that you want to say about COP, or just about what people can be doing in general to raise awareness and help save our planet?
I think, again, I don't want to parrot what I've already heard there, but just being informed and knowing that, you know, the way forward is to attend protests if you can, talk to people about it if you know someone, even a parent or someone who isn't too, who thinks climate change is just a bit of nonsense, you know, talk to them. Just open discussion is really important, and I think if everyone's talking about it, then more and more positive action will happen.
Yeah, I agree with you. Join in the conversation, everybody, about climate change, because it's not going anywhere, sadly. And by the sounds of the results of COP, it's really not going. Oh, it's so sad. Okay, well, Hamish, thank you so much for joining me today, and thank you for giving us the insight into COP26. As I said, Dulcie will remain in Glasgow for the rest of the week, and she will be covering COP, so keep an eye out on our story, and of course I'll post on the website as well for more COP news. Have a good day, Hamish.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks everybody for watching.
Today's episode was made possible by Voice Magazine, an online platform for young people interested in art and culture. You can read VoiceOver at voicemag.uk and find it on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook as VoiceMagUK. If you like this podcast, please consider helping us to make more with a donation of any amount at voicemag.uk/donate. Thanks to Kevin MacLeod for use of the track Thief in the Night. You can find more of his work on incomputech.com.